Hollywood is an incredibly fickle and tricky business at the best of times, where deals can be made and broken for so many different reasons. Most of the time, actors end up quitting roles for either scheduling reasons or basic creative differences. Sometimes, well, it's a little weirder and more complicated than that. The kind of behind-the-scenes story that makes you go, what? And then, huh? And then spiral into a hypothetical reality where the what-ifs were just, what? I'm Ewan, you're watching Whatculture, and here's our list of actors who quit movies for insane reasons. First up, he hated the camera rig. Robert Downey Jr., Gravity. Though George Clooney ultimately played the role of astronaut Matt Kowalski in Alfonso Cuarón's Gravity, the part was originally intended for one Robert Downey Jr. But Downey ended up walking away from the film during pre-production, when he met with Cuarón to test out the camera rig being used to shoot the actors for the movie's many space sequences. Due to the obviously CGI-heavy nature of the film, the actors' performances were largely captured inside of a bespoke camera rig called a light box, where thousands of LED bulbs were used to simulate outer space, and dear God, that sure sounds like a walking migraine if ever there was one. Because of the cumbersome nature of the rig, actors often had to spend hours at a time inside it, and would communicate with Cuarón through a headset. The gravity of all of this dawned on Downey when he tested the light box for just 20 minutes, at which point he realized that, yeah, maybe this isn't for me, and so he ended up leaving. While every actor has their limits where comfort is obviously concerned, it's genuinely surprising that Downey, an actor so well versed in the laborious nature of blockbuster movie production by this point in his career, was spooked by this groundbreaking shooting method. Although maybe he was just expecting something different. Who knows? A Simpsons-esque dispute here with a dispute over a cookie. James Caan. Accidental love. It isn't uncommon for actors to get into a dispute with famously ill-tempered director David O. Russell, and in the case of one James Caan, he decided to walk away from Russell's flop comedy Accidental Love over the matter of a cookie. That's just legend behavior if ever there was one. Now, when this entry first came up, my initial thought was of the Danish incident from The Simpsons, but it's actually something even weirder. You see, the beloved star of The Godfather and Thief was hired to play the small role of a US Speaker of the House who chokes to death on a cookie in the movie. Russell asked him to cough as he choked, only for Caan to argue that a person can't cough and choke at the same time. Russell suggested they just shoot the scene both ways, but Caan apparently felt that the director was coddling him and would simply end up using his preferred version, so he declined and just walked off out of there, which is such a big flex, I love it. Caan was ultimately replaced by the venerable James Brolin, but considering that Accidental Love's production was halted due to financial difficulties and later completed and released without Russell's involvement, Caan was probably smart to take his leave when he did. Next up, an iconic reason to walk away from a film. He didn't want to miss basketball games. Jack Nicholson, the Mosquito Coast. Oh man, just bless Jack Nicholson and his borderline pathological love of basketball. Like, we've all seen the photo of him with his chili spilled all over the courtside, right? It's just iconic, peak aura. Nicholson was originally hired to star in Peter Weir's 1986 drama The Mosquito Coast, which would have seen him play Ali Fox, an inventor who resettles with his family in the Central American jungle, where he tries to build a new civilization. The shoot would have required Nicholson to spend almost 3 months in Belize, which would have intersected with the schedule of his favorite basketball team, the Los Angeles Lakers. Nicholson is a passionate enough fan that he's actually had it written into his film contracts for decades that he gets guaranteed time off to watch the Lakers home games. And so, he soon enough realized that shooting in Belize for months in the middle of basketball season would prevent him from using his expensive courtside season tickets, prompting him to cede the role to Harrison Ford instead. Much as Nicholson is obviously one of the most celebrated actors of all time, it's hilarious that even starring in a big movie with a great director like Peter Weir came second to watching some basketball. Next up, the director killed a donkey for real. John C. Reilly, Mandalay. John C. Reilly was originally hired to play the part of Dr. Hector in Lars von Trier's 2005 drama Mandalay, though abruptly quit the picture in protest once he learned that the provocative director intended to kill an animal for a scene in a film. In what I can only assume was a case of, post-Shrek-induced mania, the script called for the characters to kill a donkey, cut it up, and eat it, and Reilly soon found out that von Trier planned to do it for real, something that Reilly, an animal lover, balked at. When he confronted the filmmaker about this, noting his assumption that a, prosthetic donkey would be used instead, von Trier retorted that an artificial solution would have comprised a large chunk of the drama's budget. Von Trier then referred to the animal as a quote-unquote poor old suicidal donkey, much to Reilly's frustration, and with the filmmaker refusing to back down, the actor promptly boarded a plane home and exited production. He was then replaced by Zeljko Ivanek in the role of Dr. Hector. As for the director, well, he did indeed slaughter the donkey on camera as planned, though ironically ended up cutting the sequence from the film, which only makes the whole tropic thunderiness of this entire thing even more ridiculous. Next up, to avoid the Nepo baby label, Kate Hudson. Escape from LA. When Kate Hudson came to prominence for her Oscar-nominated performance in 2000's Almost Famous, many weren't aware that she was the progeny of Hollywood royalty, being the daughter of Goldie Hawn and stepdaughter of Kurt Russell, who might just also be the best Hollywood couple ever. I love them. They're so wholesome. But yeah, Hudson's emergence was entirely by design, as she wanted to get her start in the industry without being branded a nepotism hire, or as we call them nowadays, a Nepo baby. In fact, Hudson's first major role in a big movie was almost in John Carpenter's 1996 sequel to Escape from New York, titled Escape from LA, which is also a super underrated movie and one you absolutely should give a second chance if you don't like it. I even did a video on it last year, which you should go watch if you need a little bit more convincing. And also, the video's fun, it's a great time. I think I sing some Rob Zombie in there. Run, baby, run away. Run, baby, run, escape LA. That's the surf bit. There's some surfing in there. It's a great film. Please watch it. But yeah, awesome Escape from LA tangent aside, earlier this year, Hudson revealed that she actually auditioned for a part in the film and won it. Most likely the President's Daughter, Utopia, but ultimately decided to turn it down because she didn't want to be, quote, defined by being Kurt's daughter at the very beginning of her career, which, yeah, fair. But given the cutthroat nature of Hollywood and understandable tendency for people to lean on any advantage they have, especially nepotism, it's a laudably mature perspective to share, especially considering that Hudson was still in her teens at the time of shooting. It all paid off, by the way, as Hudson became an Oscar nominee just a few short years later, but it's also easy to appreciate how walking away from a huge movie was a massive gamble at the time. On the way, a famous 90s controversy. Robin Williams, the return of Jafar. When Robin Williams was hired to voice the genie in Disney's Aladdin, he agreed to perform the role for just $75,000 instead of his usual $8 million fee, but with a few conditions. First off, Williams insisted that the marketing not use either his name or face, and that Genie couldn't take up prominent placements in the promotional campaign to avoid overshadowing his next film, Toys, which was set to release a month later. But Disney being Disney, they ultimately went, nah, and gave the Genie a major presence in their promotional campaign, and used Williams' voice extensively in commercials to sell toys and fast food. Williams was furious, and though Disney tried to smooth things over by sending him a Picasso painting worth $1 million, it damaged their working relationship enough that he refused to come back for 1994's direct-to-video sequel, The Return of Jafar. Williams was therefore replaced by The Simpsons' Dan Castellaneta as the Genie, and the relationship was only mended once Williams received a public apology from the studio, after which he agreed to return for 1996's his third film, Aladdin and the King of Thieves. Next up, his agent told him that Bond was outdated. George Lazenby. Diamonds are forever. Even though George Lazenby's casting as James Bond in On Her Majesty's Secret Service was immediately divisive, being both Australian and a non-actor, it was nevertheless expected that he'd return for the next film, Diamonds Are Forever, and was even offered a 7-picture contract by Bond's producers. However, Lazenby made the shock decision to hang up the 007 mantle after just a single outing, even boldly announcing this publicly before production on Her Majesty's Secret Service was actually completed. As to why? Well, Lazenby's agent got in his ear and persuaded him that James Bond would seem like an old, out-of-touch relic in the more progressive, forward-thinking 1970s, which, those powers of political prediction were, not very good. But yeah, needless to say, Lazenby's sudden departure didn't go down well with Bond's producers, and his co-stars Diana Rigg and Desmond Llewellyn quite rightly opined that he was making a mistake. But he stayed the course. And so, Sean Connery was roped back in for the underwhelming Diamonds Are Forever before Roger Moore took over the role from Live and Let Die onwards. Now, it goes without saying that Lazenby walked away from masses of money here, and the fact he only ever played Bond once has firmly kept him as the most polarizing iteration of the character, despite On Her Majesty's Secret Service today being rightly held in high regard as one of the best Bond films ever made. I think it's just behind Casino Royale in my overall ranking, but let me know yours down in the comments below. Next up, Tarantino wouldn't change the script. Will Smith, Django Unchained. Before Jamie Foxx was hired to play the title character in Quentin Tarantino's brilliant Django Unchained, the part was actually offered to Will Smith. And while few actors are likely to turn down an offer from one of the most celebrated filmmakers of the last 30 years, Smith indeed walked away from the table after reading the script and having his own suggestions get rebuffed. The man behind Big Willie Style later revealed that he didn't take to the fact that Django isn't the one to kill villain Calvin Candy, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, but rather Django's comrade King Schultz, of course played by Christoph Waltz. Smith added that, as a result, he felt that Django wasn't the true lead of the movie, to the extent that he asked Tarantino to rewrite the script to have Django kill Candy instead. Unsurprisingly, Tarantino was like, no. And Smith ended up leaving negotiations, clearing the path for Fox to take the part instead, and obviously do a really impressive job. There doesn't seem to be any regret from Smith, though, who called the film brilliant, just not for me, which is fair and gracious. Next up, he wasn't allowed to act with a lisp. Mark Wahlberg, Donnie Darko. Tough though it is to picture, Mark Wahlberg very nearly played the troubled title character in Donnie Darko, as of course turned out to be a breakout role for a young Jake Gyllenhaal. While you might assume that a 29-year-old Wahlberg simply thought himself too old to play a high schooler, that apparently wasn't a concern. Rather, Wahlberg was game to play Donnie and even made a suggestion to filmmaker Richard Kelly that he play Donnie with a lisp. However, Kelly wasn't interested in the idea, prompting a creative clash between the two before Wahlberg decided to walk away from the role. And so, a 19-year-old Gyllenhaal ended up winning the part, and while obviously not nearly as well known as Wahlberg at the time, it was absolutely the right casting choice in the end, I think we can all agree. Even without getting into the whole lisp thing, I really can't imagine Wahlberg convincingly playing Donnie, like, at all. Being a part of the Funky Bunch, yeah, no, that's a thing he does very well, but not Donnie Darko. On the way, he didn't want to wear tights. Kurt Russell, Ladyhawke. Kurt Russell was originally hired to star in his good pal Richard Donner's 1985 medieval fantasy film, Ladyhawke, where he was set to play the heroic Etienne of Navarre. Such a good name and title, oh my god, I love it. But when it came to getting fitted for his character's costume, Russell had an awkward realization that he simply couldn't bring himself to wear tights for a role, which is really odd given he literally goes full Bugs Bunny style drag in action masterpiece Tango and Cash, But I guess historical tights are a different thing altogether, maybe? Either way, Russell profusely apologized to Donner for his tights-related anxiety, telling him that he made a mistake accepting the gig in the first place. But rather than leave the production without one of its main actors, he immediately recommended Rutger Hauer, who he helped Donner actually secure. In a surely awkward turn of events, Russell reportedly spent 2 weeks on set waiting for the negotiations with Hauer to be completed, at which point he was released and able to go home. And I really want to know what he got up to during those weeks. Like, was he sunbathing, sipping on some cocktails, maybe having a bit of a Captain Ron moment? I don't know. I think that's really, it's just nice to have Kurt Russell around on the set, I guess, either way. Sadly, Ladyhawke was a box office flop, despite starring Hauer, Matthew Broderick, and Michelle Pfeiffer. And I guess it's tough to picture how Russell's presence would have changed much about that either. Tom Cruise made him. Dougray Scott, X-Men. Believe it or not, Dougray Scott was originally hired to play Wolverine in 2000's X-Men as part of a multi-film deal, though ended up quitting because Tom Cruise basically said, "No, don't do that," which is a really convincing argument, I guess, if it comes from Tom Cruise. Scott was supposed to wrap shooting Mission Impossible 2 and immediately go to work on X-Men, but when the former ran over schedule, Scott found himself caught in a bit of a dilemma. At this point, he was approached by Cruise, who insisted that he remain on Mission Impossible 2 to complete his outstanding obligations, which does kind of sound a bit like a Luca Brasi and The Godfather kind of thing, but that's showbiz, baby. Though Scott was initially adamant that he'd be able to make both films, and executives scrambled to try and accommodate him, in a recent interview, he claimed that Cruise was a, quote, very powerful guy who ultimately didn't let him star as Wolverine, which is, is really ominous and mysterious and kind of a little insidious too. What the hell even happened specifically? Unfortunately, if you, like me, do want those specifics, Scott hasn't been too forthcoming with what happened with Cruise on Mission Impossible 2, but it nevertheless opened the door for Hugh Jackman to be swiftly drafted in as his X-Men replacement in what undeniably became a career-defining role for the actor. In the trajectory of both actors following that casting, yeah, I can understand why he'd be thinking about it a lot in 2025, like a whole 25 years after the fact. It's gotta sting missing out on Wolverine. Robert Mitchum's marijuana conviction. Lizabeth Scott, The Big Steal. Lizabeth Scott was originally hired to play the female lead in the 1949 film The Big Steal, but ended up exiting the project just 3 weeks before cameras were set to start rolling. The reason? Well, during pre-production, original male lead George Raft was replaced with Robert Mitchum, who had recently been incarcerated for possession of marijuana. Though RKO head Howard Hughes felt that Mitchum's quote-unquote bad boy image would only aid the film's publicity, Scott and her management felt that starring opposite the actor would negatively affect her image and standing in Hollywood. As a result, Scott dipped and was replaced by Jane Greer, whose pregnancy forced production to be rushed, resulting in the film's short 71-minute runtime. It makes a little more sense. Now, to modern sensibilities, it's comical for a Hollywood actor to quit a film because of their co-star's weed habits, but considering that anti-marijuana sentiments pervaded the US throughout the 1940s, and Hollywood was an obviously unforgiving place to be a female actor, it makes a lot more sense. Obviously, Mitchum's career wasn't hampered by the conviction, following up the seminal Out of the Past with the likes of Night of the Hunter and Cape Fear in the subsequent decade and a half, and having an incredible Twilight with the likes of the Friends of Eddie Coyle, the Yakuza, Ryan's Daughter, and the Jim Jarmusch-directed western Dead Man, which was also his final movie. Next up, he wanted it to be more serious. Sylvester Stallone, Beverly Hills Cop. Tough though it might be to believe, Beverly Hills Cop was originally set to be a star vehicle for Sylvester Stallone. But when Sly came aboard, he rewrote the script to remove almost all traces of humor and rework it into a more generic action thriller, while renaming Detective Axel Foley to Axel Cabretti. However, producer Don Simpson didn't want to move forward with Stallone's proposed changes, preferring to stick to the more light-hearted original tone, and with the star unwilling to budge, there was no choice but for him to exit the project altogether. Stallone ended up leaving just 2 weeks before shooting was set to begin, at which point he used his rewrite as the basis for his 1986 actioner, Cobra. With the heat very much on, production then scrambled to replace Stallone, bringing in Eddie Murphy, who felt the current script wasn't funny, resulting in frantic rewrites which were only completed the day before shooting started. And honestly, this is one of those rare cases where a parting of ways on all accounts worked out for everyone involved, given that both Beverly Hills Cop and Cobra were sizable box office hits, and both great movies in their own way. The former is a joyous 80s action comedy, and the latter is one of the most deliciously insane movies Sly ever made. Next up, his character wasn't allowed a German accent or dogs. John Candy, Ghostbusters. Before the role of Louis Tully in Ghostbusters was offered to Rick Moranis, it was actually originally intended for the late, great John Candy, who, at the time of recording, has recently been the subject of a really loving documentary that I'd really recommend you check out if you haven't already. But yeah, Ghostbusters. When director Ivan Reitman sent Candy the script, the actor stated that he didn't really understand Louis's character, and promptly made some suggestions to, spruce him up a bit. Namely, Candy asked about giving Louis a German accent and letting him have a bunch of German Shepherd dogs. Yeah, Reitman wasn't keen at all on these ideas, noting that Ghostbusters is an incredibly American movie in which New York City is basically a character in and of itself, so the German accent wouldn't really fit. According to Reitman, this led to a quote-unquote very uncomfortable conversation between the two pals, which I imagine sort of went down like this. Hey John, so about that whole, German accent and German Shepherd thing? Yeah, it's really funny, isn't it? No, actually, no. So I was thinking we could do this, whole thing where I react to things and go, Mein Gott! And then there's all this really cool stuff involving the German Shepherds who terrorizing the apartment, and maybe they get possessed. John, I could smoke a big alpine pipe thing, maybe? That could be really fun, It's kind of he's got a whole smoke. Maybe he's got some World War II drama connected to him too. John. And also, what if at the end it wasn't a giant marshmallow man, but my guy, Louis, becomes a giant guy and he starts terrorizing. Wait. You don't like it? Well, it's not that I don't think it's not funny. I just don't, it's not Ghostbusters funny, if that makes sense. Yeah. It's like we were right there in the room. Reitman then sent the script to Moranis, another actor he'd worked with previously, who accepted the part just an hour later. Though I can think we can all absolutely picture Candy playing Louis, with all due love and respect his way, Moranis was clearly the right casting choice. They were offered 2% of Amy Poehler's salary, Bill Hader and Mindy Kaling, Inside Out 2. When Inside Out 2 was first announced, it was assumed that all the original voice cast would return, including Bill Hader as Fear and Mindy Kaling as Disgust. But before release, it was revealed that Hader and Kaling decided not to return due to the lowball salary offers they'd received from Disney, who, lest I remind you, is one of the richest, companies on the planet. And Inside Out 2 is guaranteed to make a lot of money. Just to pour some more salt into these wounds. It later transpired that the pair were offered just $100,000 to reprise their roles, a mere 2% of the $5 million paid to lead Amy Poehler, plus bonuses. While it's hardly surprising that Poehler would be paid more than her co-stars considering the comparative size of her role, does that really constitute a 50 times bigger payday? Furthermore, Hader and Kaling weren't offered any of the additional bonus or incentive payments that their co-star was. Considering the duo brought a lot of personality to the first film, it was a shame to see them not return for the sequel. Considering the gigantic pay gap between them and Poehler, you can't really blame them. They were ultimately replaced by Tony Hale and Liza Lapira, who were fine. Next up, he couldn't cry on cue. Steve McQueen. Close Encounters of the Third Kind. This is actually like my favorite entry in this list. Yeah, really cool story. Let's get into it. Steve McQueen was originally offered the lead role of Roy Neary in Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, a blue-collar worker who becomes obsessed with UFOs following a chance encounter with one. When the offer went out to McQueen, he told Spielberg that though he loved the script, he wasn't the right fit for the part because of his inability to cry on cue, which he felt would compromise the character and the film as a whole. Now, perhaps surprisingly, Spielberg wanted McQueen enough for Roy that he even offered to change the script to have Roy not cry. But McQueen protested, saying that it was his favorite scene in the whole script. And so, McQueen left the film, at which point Richard Dreyfuss was subbed in, and the rest is history. It's easy to see why Spielberg wanted McQueen for the part, but Dreyfuss's energy just felt like a better fit in the end anyway. Tears and all. Honestly though, what a cool anecdote. Some really nice honesty from McQueen, although it's easy to see just how he would have been a great fit for Close Encounters. He wanted another actor to do it. David Hyde Pierce, Hellboy 2, The Golden Army. In Guillermo del Toro's original Hellboy, the role of aquatic creature Abe Sapien was played by two people. Doug Jones portrayed the character under makeup on set, while the voice was provided by Frasier star David Hyde Pierce. Sony reportedly insisted upon a named actor being hired to voice Abe, and so that's where Pierce came in. But Pierce ultimately felt that the character was brought to life by Jones's performance, and so did the voice work uncredited, while also refusing to attend the film's premiere or promote it, all out of respect for Jones's work. And so, it surely wasn't terribly surprising that Pierce elected not to return at all for Hellboy 2: The Golden Army, convincing those in charge to just let Jones provide the voice himself. It's incredibly rare for an actor to turn down a sequel payday as easy as this, but Pierce had the integrity and the privilege of those sweet, sweet Frasier residuals to throw Jones a bone. Next up, he found the flying scenes silly. John Travolta. Flight. Robert Zemeckis' terrific 2012 drama Flight was originally set to star John Travolta in the role of alcoholic pilot Whip Whitaker, and though Travolta was in love with the central concept, he ended up quitting the film during development over creative misgivings with the script. Travolta, who is himself a private pilot and owns numerous aircraft, found the central plane crash a bit silly, feeling that the moment where Whitaker inverts the damaged plane and flies it upside down to correct its trajectory was quote-unquote a bit much. As a trained pilot, Travolta is certainly liable to know more about this than Joe Public, but at the same time, Whitaker's maneuver in the film is absolutely scientifically possible, albeit extremely difficult to execute, which is very much how it's depicted in the final film. Either way, considering that Washington received a Best Actor Oscar nom for his performance and Travolta went on to do, well, not much worth mentioning in 2012, you probably should have just trusted Zemeckis to convincingly pull the sequence off. He hated the first film's ending. Crispin Glover, Back to the Future Part 2. Crispin Glover starred in Back to the Future as Marty McFly's father George, and when the second and third films were set to be shot back to back, it was readily assumed that Glover would return for them. But negotiations with Glover ultimately broke down and he quit both sequels. Why? Well, though Glover has stated that the producers offered him less than half the salary of other returning cast members, he said his primary reason for exiting the franchise was his dislike of the first film's ending. Glover philosophically disagreed with the McFly family getting a happy ending defined primarily by financial gain, and this heavily influenced his decision not to return for the sequels. This led to a tricky situation where the producers recast the role of George with actor Jeffrey Weissman while giving him facial prosthetics to more closely resemble Glover. Once Glover learned that the prosthetic molds were taken from his actual face, having been used in the aged George prosthetics in the first film, he filed a lawsuit against the producers, arguing that they had no right to use his direct likeness. The matter was ultimately settled out of court, but became a key case on the issue of likeness rights in cinema, with the Screen Actors Guild ruling that productions couldn't reproduce an actor's likeness in a subsequent project without their explicit permission. And lastly, the frustrating shooting schedule. Rebecca Ferguson, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. It's incredibly rare for actors to walk away from juicy blockbuster franchise roles, so it was definitely surprising that Rebecca Ferguson opted to duck out of the Mission Impossible series ahead of its recent 8th and final entry, The Final Reckoning. Ferguson's character of Ilsa Faust was rather abruptly killed off in the previous film, Dead Reckoning Part 1, and this was due to Ferguson's own decision to exit the franchise early. She later revealed that this was largely a result of the extremely time-consuming nature of shooting a Mission Impossible movie, which prevented her from taking on different projects. Because director Christopher McQuarrie tends to write each film on the fly during production, it can often mean that actors are effectively on call for months while waiting to find out when they're actually needed. And so, Ferguson decided instead to pursue other opportunities, with the actress swiftly pointing out that she was able to shoot 2 seasons of Apple TV sci-fi series Silo, and also Dune Part 2, in the time it took The Final Reckoning to complete its production. Now, to be clear, Ferguson's logic absolutely tracks, but it also speaks to the utterly ludicrous nature of how the more recent Mission Impossible movies were actually made, as wonderful and as joyous as they are.